Welcome to Hope Through Hard Stuff, a podcast from Winning at Home. Please welcome your host, speaker, and award-winning author, Steve Norman.
Well, welcome back to Hope Through Hard Stuff. It's my great joy to have as my conversation partner today, Joe Leal. Joel is a guy that I knew at Kensington Church during Kelly and I's years there, not all that terribly long ago, and he's involved in leading student ministries there now. He's a U of M fan and an all-around great guy. Joe, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Steve. I appreciate the time being here.
Joe, one of the topics that we cover on the show is just different challenges that people are having in life and specifically in parenting. And I'm so grateful for how you and Taylor have been pretty candid, either in your speaking or in your social media presence about some of the curveballs that life has thrown you as parents and grace that God has given you along the way. And would just love for you to share whatever parts of your story you feel comfortable sharing with our listeners.
Yeah. So just to kind of speed things along for you, we have two kids. We have Jackson, who is 5, and Blake, who will be turning 3 here in just a couple of weeks at the end of January. So we are balancing life of 2 kids, kindergarten, all of that. Unique to our story is Jackson has a pretty rare genetic disorder that we've just kind of been tackling through over the last year and a half or so. And so it's called KDM5C syndrome. As of right now, we know there's less than 100 cases in the world with his disorder. And so for us walking through this line, it's been kind of challenging, but also we've seen God working in it. It's a unique situation that we did not see ourselves in. And, he has a lot of kind of tendencies that would be considered on the autism spectrum. Nonverbal, he has a handful of words here and there, mood swing stuff, obviously some vision. There's just a bunch of things that as we kind of peel the onion back, we're discovering who he is, but also there's a little bit of, kind of frustration of not knowing what the future looks like because there are so few cases of this genetic disorder in the world right now.
So, Joe, when did you and Taylor start to learn that something was not typical developmentally?
Well, as new parents, everyone tells you when those milestones are supposed to be. You're supposed to be walking at this age, talking at this age, doing this. And with Jackson, everything was kind of delayed milestones. And so as, new parents, you kind of, you're worried about that. And so we were kind of always trying to figure out, okay, why isn't he, babbling yet? Why isn't he talking? Why isn't he walking? Walking was the big thing. And so I think he was about 18 months and he wasn't walking yet. So every parent's, red flags are going up right now. What is going on? And so I remember us sitting there and he had kind of had his eye was kind of doing a lazy eye type of movement. And so someone was like, you should get his vision checked. And I was like, how do you get a vision checked for a 18-month? What does that even look like? We went and got his vision checked and the doctor recommended glasses. And I kid you not, the next day he was walking. And so we were like, oh my gosh, maybe this was if he just had bad eyes, he's walking, we kind of had this false sense of hope almost. We're like, okay, now everything's going to catch up. Now he can actually see our faces. He can start mimicking words. And so we were kind of on this new trajectory of excitement going, maybe all these milestones are now going to be hit. And then, a year passes by, 2 years, we're still not getting all of the words, everything. And so then that just put us down a new, rabbit hole of, testing, doctors' meetings, all of these to kind of figure out what was going on, MRIs, on the brain to try to figure out if there was delayed myelination tissue, all of these crazy things that we were trying to figure out. And we just kept striking out, not getting any real answers to what was going on. And so finally, a doctor, a neurologist recommended some deep genetic testing. And when we did that, when we went down that road and had a couple of confirmations, there was, kind of a break in his genetic line that they could point to and say, hey, this is, I think, where the overlying problem is. And so when you get that news, genetics are, kind of a black and white area. There's not a rehab right now where it can fix genetic chromosomal breaks. It's kind of hey, this is now the new path that you are going down. And it's a pretty black and white path that there's therapies and things to alleviate, but there's nothing that can necessarily, in the human world, fix this problem that you now have.
And Joe, what was it like to be on the receiving end of that information?
It's hard, obviously. You kind of have this season of mourning, in a way where you're the way that you look at your child's life with all of the other milestones, and having Blake, who's our, now almost 3-year-old, walking through this, even with her, you kind of hit the different mourning phases where with Jackson being nonverbal and not being able to communicate as easily as Blake, even her, she's talking early, she's having full conversations with us. She's telling us about, what she wants to eat, what she wants to, you have all of these things, and you have different like times of mourning where you're like, man, I missed out on all of these with, Jackson. Cause we just, we didn't know what we were missing until we had that second one of just those like moments that all, many other parents get to experience. And that was what's, frustrating for us is like the frustration side of like, man, what is his, like, what's going on in his mind? Is he able to understand this? And then you get this genetic, disorder or diagnosis, and you're just kind of hit with like almost a sense of finality in a way where like other types of, developmental delays, there's like hope, there's light at the end of the tunnel where you're saying, hey, we can work at this, we can improve, we can do this. And then all of a sudden you get hit with like a genetic thing where, I look at it like in the medical sense going like, man, there's not a quick fix for this. This is now on a track that we're going to go down where it's more of like, how do we live with this? And how do we make the most of this rather than how do we fix this?
Yeah. Joe, you and I both come from like good, hardwired, old school Pentecostal roots. Like how did you process well-meaning people who wanted to help and were maybe given some spiritual answers that felt like oversimplifications?
Yeah, I think that was, something that I've always, obviously, I grew up in that type of background, and I've seen God do miracles in my own family. Like I've seen God heal. I've seen God do incredible things. And so sometimes like, I never want to put, a finality on what Jackson's going through as like, well, this is the end all be all. Like, obviously we have faith, but also like for me, I've learned to like kind of realign what I think a miracle could be. And so for us, like right now, we have, like I said, there's no long-term case studies of what a child with KDM5C looks like when they're 35, 45, 50. Like, we have no idea what that looks like. And so for us, like, the miracles that we're looking at and the things that like we're like, man, it would be a miracle if one day like Jackson was able to like live by himself. Like if that's the miracle, like maybe he's never going to have the full vocabulary we have. Maybe he's not going to be, but like if he could be like in a group home or if he could live, like that would be a miracle, because right now, like we don't see how that's an option or possibility. And so sometimes people will be like, I believe he can like speak tomorrow. Like we just need to pray. And I'm like, I understand. And that's like good, well, and like, I feel that, but also I'm like, I'm kind of realigning what I believe a miracle would be. And so not to like taper expectations, but in a way it's like, I believe God can, this would be amazing if this could happen, because right now, like we're looking at it and it's not a doom and gloom, but it's like, it's a tough, like it's an uphill battle that we're looking at for him. And well-meaning things that people say, sometimes it doesn't make me mad, but sometimes I'm like, yeah, the way you're saying it like does like hurt, because you're making it sound like, this is just a quick thing that we could fix really easily, when I'm like, it's difficult. It's hard.
I'm so glad to hear the candor in it, Joe. And I think what's been compelling to so many people about your story is just your willingness to be able to say, this is hard and we could use prayer, or we need help, or we're tired. Like, how have you learned to voice those needs in a world where sometimes it's, people don't always give you margin to say, I need help?
Yeah. And I think, with anyone who's parenting a child with special needs, you look at the world differently now. Like you look at the world through those lenses. And for us, we want to create awareness for not only Jackson, but the other kids who are, going through this syndrome. But also like, it's a way of us to like communicate, to our friends and family, people around us. Hey, if we don't like show up to a birthday party, it's not because we don't care about you, we don't love you. It's because like, it creates a lot of stress for us to bring him into an environment that we don't know if it's necessarily like set up well for him. And so we have some people in our lives who are really good at checking in. And like, sometimes it's like for us, like they'll even go so far as like to even give us an exit strategy of like, before we go, like, hey, we're having people over. Hey, if it's going to be too much for Jackson, like we have another room that he can go into. And he, it's got couches and sofas and he can just kind of sit in there. And if you guys need to go, remove yourself from the party for a few minutes, like to go spend some time over there, if it's overwhelming. And like, they give us that break where it's like, okay, that's like, we feel seen. We feel like somebody has like thought about us. And sometimes when we share that, through social media, like we're trying to create awareness, but we're also like trying to tell people like, hey, we've not disconnected from our lives because of you. It's hard with this child that is unpredictable sometimes, and being in environments like it stresses us out to be parenting, and like it's hard to enjoy those moments that we want to when we're worried about how the interaction is, or it's just difficult sometimes. And so by us sharing, we've had a lot of people who were like, hey, I never thought about like how you feel about coming over to different people's houses. Like it's really hard for us to go visit other people's houses sometimes because it's an uncontrolled environment that we're not used to. It's not, we always say it's not Jackson proof. Like there's things that he can grab. There's like food that's out. It's like, that's why it's really hard for us. Like sometimes just sharing those things on social media just creates awareness and creates maybe new perspectives for people who know people who have kids with special needs to, filter their thoughts about it, but also like to how be more inclusive to those behaviors and inclusive to those kids who are and their families who are, walking down that road.
So it sounds like you're saying that for families who have circumstances that are similar to yours, if you're in that friend circle, like don't give up on those people,
Yeah.
and you can empower those people by giving them options.
Yep. And it's one of those things where it's like, we've had, like I said, there's a handful of friends in our lives who make us feel really seen in those situations where they get it, where they're, when we go on trips or something, they're like, hey, like, what is Jackson like? Are there any certain toys he likes? Are there shows he likes? Just to kind of make him feel a little bit more comfortable. Or, there was one family who we went to, and they knew that one of Jackson's triggers is a food, not that he's going to eat it, but he just likes to touch it. And so like coming out of a post-COVID world, germs, all of that, like going to birthday parties and stuff where there's food all the way there. I remember there was a family who's like, hey, we put the food like up high and then like in a different space. So like, it's not going to be, in the open. So we'd love to see Jackson there. It's like just that idea that he was thought about, or that someone had like gone through just the mental things of going like, hey, if we invited the Leals, like there you have Jackson, like, what does that look like to bring him into a situation or a birthday party or social event? How can we care and make them feel seen?
I love it because the table is that great kind of biblical metaphor of inclusion. And I really appreciate that you're saying that there are people who, with a little extra thought and a little extra grace and a little extra creativity, are saying we can widen the circle. We can open the table to include Jackson and, the Leal family, but here's what it might require in order to make that happen.
Yeah. And then there's plenty of times where like between me and Taylor, we're like, we'll just look at the situation and we'll say, hey, let's, split off. I'm going to stay home with Jackson for this one. But then also like you get that same kind of feeling sometimes where people say things, we can go back to like what you're saying, when people say things that can come off just like the hard way is like, one example of like, if Taylor just takes Blake, our little one, to a party and not Jackson, a lot of the questions like, oh, where's Joe and Jackson? And it just kind of reiterates that fact of like, hey, well, we didn't want to bring, and it has a weird, so some people like have already picked up if just one of us shows up to a place and we don't have them, like that's just what we're rolling with, and like go with it. And because sometimes when people say things like, oh, you should have brought them, like we could have, it just kind of creates that like, negative like feeling as a parent, like, man, do I not trust my own kid? Like other people believe more in him than I do. Like you kind of run down this circle of like guilt and shame a little bit. And so there's times where people are just like, nope, we know if only one of them shows up, like we're just going to roll with it and be happy that half the family's here for this one. And maybe next time we can have everybody.
So there's a kind of like a stereotype that sometimes marriages that have challenges around kids who have special needs face different kinds of pressures and strains and kind of obstacles than ones that don't. How's that played out for you guys?
I mean, that's something that we're still, working on. Is one of the things that, and my wife takes on a brunt of this. Like she is the person who is like on Facebook groups late at night, researching more about this genetic condition, is, finding different ways for, local help and resources, from, either government aids or school aids or whatever we can do to find more resources, more abilities, more therapies, whatever we can do. And so it's so easy to like lose track of like, not only who you are as like a person, but even as a, a married couple, because you're investing all of your time into, this child. You want to, we're advocating, we're doing the best we can. And there's been times where like a week or two will go by and we're like, I don't know if we've had a real conversation about our lives, like how we're feeling. Right. And so like those check-ins. And so it's something that we're, not perfect at. It's definitely a work in progress. But one of the things that has been really beneficial for us is we have gotten help from the state as far as respite care. And so Jackson gets a certain amount of hours every single week where we have hired somebody who's, near and dear to our family that we trust and love and that knows Jackson really, really well, but also knows Blake really well and knows our family dynamic. And so, the actual state actually pays for her to come and give us time away. And so we are able to go, go to the gym together or go out for dinner and have a meal together and like actually have those moments to check in. Or even, for my wife, she serves with our high school ministry now because of that. Like, so she has an ability and an outlet to not only get our lives together, but also feel like she can have a little bit in her to pour back out to someone else who's not her own kids. And so having that kind of help has been revolutionary for our lives because it's just giving us that time where we can reconnect and have a normal kind of conversation together that's not surrounded around while our kids are, around us or trying to advocate or figure out what's best for them.
Yeah. And I think that's something that other people wouldn't even stop to consider, to be able to say, you just can't scroll through a list of 14 possible babysitters. Like,
that's 100%.
So for you to know that you have a person that you can trust and that their resources allow that to happen financially, is something that you don't take lightly and don't take for granted.
No, and it's absolutely huge because that idea, like there's a handful of people in our lives that we do trust with him, but those are the people who've gone really above and beyond to like learn who he is. There's like one of our friends' moms is one of the people that watches him and our daughter, quite often. And I mean, she has done her research on the disease and she's like, hey, I've looked at this, like with autism spectrum disorder, like she's doing research on her own to figure out how she can like care. And so for us, like that's a huge lifesaver because, as he gets older, we're like, it's not, your neurotypical child. Like there's a bunch of things that come with him. And not to say, I mean, he is a very happy kid. Like most people look at him like he is just a bundle of joy and like he is, and like he's the most fun, but there are like challenges that come along with that. And not everybody, is ready for that sometimes.
Sure. Joe, how long has it been since you got the official diagnosis?
I believe it's about 1.5 years since we got the official KDM5C diagnosis. We had an autism spectrum ASD diagnosis probably when he was like 3, but then about 6 months after that, we got the genetic.
So Joe, what would you say to parents who are now where you were then? Like, what do you say to individuals or couples who are just now starting their journey and are feeling a little bit overwhelmed?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing for us, and like I said, my wife has really led the charge, is she has found somebody who has actually gone through this process, their son has autism and they've become, sisters through this journey, as it was just kind of a small world. They're in the same school district, same everything. They actually met here at church as Taylor's our kids director. And she had just kind of noticed some things about this child that maybe he needed an extra, set of eyes on him. And so she had actually talked to the dad about, hey, we have a room for, it's called Special Treasure. It's a little bit more one-on-one for kids who may be struggling a little bit or maybe on the spectrum or whatever. He had excelled in that room and she had formed a bond with this mom. And then we find out, a few weeks later that we're going through down this road. And so Taylor's friend Tessa has gone down and like, she has talked about therapists, how about she has got us into different programs. She's been like, oh, we tried this. How about that? And so it's just been an amazing, like, team effort between their family and our family of like their son's 7, our son's 5. It's this amazing, they have walked, they're a couple steps ahead of us. And so even with talking about like school programs, like we're in the same school district, which is amazing, but she's like, hey, there's a couple options at this school district for kids who are on the spectrum. Like, you should look into this and you should talk to this teacher, or you should say this word because that actually gets you a conversation in his IEP in this direction. And so just having that person who's walked down that, we're like, oh my goodness, like they have opened our eyes, opened our doors to things that have literally changed our lives because we didn't know it was available. And so having somebody who has walked through that and somebody who's been down that road has like alleviated so much of the way for us.
Wow. How has your community grown then? Like, it sounds like you're meeting people who have been a couple steps ahead of you and you're meeting other people who are a couple steps behind you.
Yeah. So there's, and just, sharing. And that's one of the things that we've really tried to use our social media for, is not only to share the struggles, because not every day, but also to create awareness that maybe somebody else is walking down this road. And I know that we've had people who have reached out to, both me and my wife directly, like asking like, hey, we just got an autism spectrum diagnosis on our child. Like, where do we start? Because, sometimes like, what do you do? Like they get this diagnosis and then you walk out the door and you're like, now what? And so they've reached out to us, and just being able to go even express like, hey, well, does your, where do you live? Does your community have, an early childhood special education program? Because if you have an ECSC in your district, like your child can go to that, with that disorder, like with that diagnosis, and like they can get OT, occupational therapy, they can get speech therapy, they can get physical therapy, like starting at age 3 if you have that in your district. And so we were just talking with our friends who are just starting this journey, and like just giving them that information of going like, hey, not only are they getting those therapies, and they can start at age 3, but like it gives you like an hour and a half or 2 hours of a break. Like it's free. Like you don't have to pay for that. Just having that time to like have a coffee before it gets cold, to have that mental, reset, and just kind of sharing like, hey, there's resources, there's things out there, but nobody tells you that when you walk out the door. Like you have to either find it for yourself or hope that somebody tells you about it. And so for us sharing those things, we're hoping that if there's somebody who's going to walk down this path of not only, any special need really, but just going down this path, like you have to find somebody who's walked down it before you. And so we're hoping to be that for other people too.
That's great. Joe, what has your journey with Jackson changed the way that you see God?
It's changed a lot, because like, you go through that feeling of like, kind of like just anger at times, because especially with just that frustration of, for me, it's always been like, he can't like communicate with me in the same way that my like 3-year-old. So like, I'll give you an example. This past over Christmas, everyone in our house was sick. And it was really hard because I had one child, Blake, who could tell me, hey, Daddy, my tummy doesn't feel good. And I can be, oh, I'm really sorry, Blake. And then I have another son who I can see is visibly sick, but he can't tell me what is wrong. Like he can't tell me, oh, I have a headache. Oh, my stomach hurts. Oh, I have a sore throat. You can even like, it's hard to go like, even like asking like what he wants to drink, like, do you want water? And he can't tell you yes or no. He just kind of will either give you a no, or he touches his head for yes. And so we're with Blake, I can just be like, hey, I know your stomach's upset. You want some orange juice? She's like, no, Daddy, I want apple juice. And just that simple difference between apple and orange juice, I can't have that conversation with Jackson. So sometimes it's really frustrating. And like, if I'm honest, I can get like frustrated with God. Like, why me? Like, why did you give me this hand to deal, and what am I supposed to do with this? But then there's moments, with, that unconditional love, that, no matter what, like I have for this child. And it reminds me of that unconditional love that God has for me, but like also like that unique bond that me and him have, and that, our family has with him, is you don't need words to show love. Like I know he loves me so much. I know he loves his family so much. And like, I don't need those words. And so I've seen God work in that, like showing unconditional love, but then also like I've seen God show up with just the people that he surrounded us with, and just the amount of people who are praying for him, the amount of people who think about him, that care about him. It is a reminder to me that God's saying like, hey, this is a difficult hand you've dealt, but I'm not making you go through this alone. Like I am going to provide the people around you. I'm going to provide the resources around you to walk down this thing. So that has really changed my perspective, is every time me and my wife kind of have a moment to actually sit down and talk about like where we are on this journey, it's mind-blowing to us to see the people who have either prayed for us or reached out about him, but also in the way that God has showed up. Like even I look at this for, our state coverage, it's thousands of dollars a month that we are able to have time off for us, but also provide him for therapies. And so it's just an amazing way to see God's providence in our lives over and over again, just not only with the people, but also just the resources that he surrounded us with to try to give Jackson the best, shot at this thing.
Joe, it's good for you to say and to celebrate that there are people who are joining you on this journey that you might not have otherwise met if deck hadn't been like stacked this particular way. What prayer requests do you guys have in this next season for your son and for your family that people who are listening might be able to jump on and pray with and about for you?
Yeah, I think it's all the same things, that we just have wisdom of what we're supposed to do. He started a kindergarten program. It's kind of a hybrid program at a school. It's a small class with, 6 kids in it. All of them have developmental delays or on different areas, but it's just that idea of what do we do as parents with this journey of school? Do I ever think Jackson is going to be able to graduate high school and have a high school diploma? Like, I don't know what that looks like. And so as we're figuring out like what to do, like, is it more important for him to be in a school school where he's learning academic settings, or is it more important for him to be, in a ABA type program, or, behavioral programs that are going to help him function in the world? Like, how do we balance those decisions? Because that's a decision that we have to figure out, is how much time do we invest in his education, and how much time do we invest in his behavioral, and where's the balance in those things for us? But then also how do we keep our family happy and healthy together in those things? Because it's really easy to, as a couple, kind of check out on each other because you're so invested over here. And then when when the kids go to bed and you're finally kind of done, it's really easy to just, okay, I'm emotionally and mentally tapped out for the day. I don't know if I can have a conversation of how are we doing in our marriage right now. I don't know if I'm ready. So all of that, just the balance of life and just kind of the decisions of wisdom we have to make.
That's so good. Joe, if there are other parents or families who are hearing this story and are curious about your journey, or want to lead more, or could use some help or input, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Instagram is a big one, both of me and Taylor. So, my Instagram handle is just @TheRealJoeLeal. And then if you go to my page, you'll see my wife's handle in there. Hers is Taylor Leal, but there's a few extra R's in there. But you'll see it there. Or if you just click on a hashtag that says KDM5C, you'll probably find me or hers post on there, because like I said, it's a pretty rare condition. So there's not a lot of people using that hashtag, but it is an interesting community that we are beginning to form on there. And so those are the two ways that I would say you can find us.
Joe, thanks so much for your time, and just for your humility and your courage and your tenacity. Just seeing the way that you love and parent both your son and your daughter has been an encouragement and an inspiration to so many people at your church, and even and beyond. Your story's been a blessing to Kelly and I and our family. And we want to thank you for walking this road with courage and humility and grace. I think it's a testament to your faith and the great love that you have, not just for Jackson, but for Blake as well.
Oh, I appreciate it, Steve. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll talk again soon.
All right. See ya.
Thanks for listening to Hope Through the Hard Stuff. If you liked what you heard, please remember to subscribe to it, rate and review it, and then share it with others. Winning at Home offers hope through counseling and coaching, motivational speaking, community events, and other media resources. If you believe in what we do and want to support us in our mission, consider making a donation at winningathome.com.